Yes, we are happy to welcome Christy Berghoef this morning to kick off our Lenten series on the topic or the theme of home. Christy bought two of her books here today, Cracking the Pot, a spiritual memoir of expansion, and also Rooted, a spiritual memoir of homecoming, which I think will be the focus of our discussion today. And we have some copies in the back. If you need one, they're $20 each. You can just give the money to Christy, but those are available in the back. Christy is obviously a writer, author of, like I say, the two books. She also has her Doctor of Ministry from Western Theological Seminary in the Sacred Art of Writing. And she has a blog on Substack entitled Wheat and Willow. She's also a worship leader. She coordinates the worship at the Holland UCC Church. She's a contemplative photographer, and she has some beautiful photos, including of her garden, at christyberghoef.com. They're lovely photos. They're gorgeous. So you may want to take a look at that too. So we are thankful that Christy is here today, to begin our Lenten series on home. Thank you, Christy.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be with you all. I have a lot of friends in this community, so it's good to be with you. Let's see, I'm going to figure this out. Nope. Okay, well, I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to share my story of coming home. I'm going to share what home has been to me. I'm going to share a little bit of the struggles of coming back home. So I grew up on a 40-acre flower farm. In the 1890s, my ancestors came from the Netherlands, and they settled in South Dakota. Then in the 1940s, mid-1940s, they kind of dispersed to all over the country to these little Dutch enclaves. And my grandparents came to Holland, and they settled on a 40-acre farm just kind of between Holland and Saugatuck. And then in the 1970s, my grandparents were empty nesters. They had this big farmhouse. My parents were interested in purchasing the house. So my grandparents cut a little corner off the farm and built a small house for themselves. And our family moved into the farmhouse that my dad grew up in, and my aunt and uncle bought the 40-acre farm across the street. So for me, growing up was very much something of an extended family, and we had our 40-acre farm, my aunt and uncle's 40-acre farm. So I grew up with my cousins and very close to them and to my grandparents as well. That's me, that's little Christy. I have a lot of grace for her and love for her. So we did not have a lot growing up. It was a stretch for my parents to buy this farm, and it was important to them that their kids all be part of the Christian schools. So they were stretched. We wore secondhand clothes. I usually wore my brother's hand-me-downs. We were always driving an old car on the verge of breakdown. Our walls were plaster walls, and I remember them crumbling and coming apart, and old wallpaper peeling from the walls. We had few Christmas gifts under the tree every year, and our vacations never involved airlines or cruise ships. We lived very simply, and we put our old canvas army tent on the top of the car and traveled the country, and my dad popped that thing up wherever the cheapest place was that he could find it. My brother recalls my mom crying at times because she did not know if there would be food at the end of the week or if we would make the bills at the end of the month. But we also had a large vegetable garden. So this was to offset the strain on my parents' budget. We had a number of fruit trees. We had grapevines. So we grew all of our own vegetables and our fruits. It was a family affair. We were all, as kids, expected to be on the ground, on our knees, planting and weeding and watering and tending, so that we grew up with our hands in the dirt, and there's kind of a communion that happens there. There was a real closeness to the ground, and then we would get together in the kitchen and have an assembly line where we would can and freeze and dry everything. My dad and my grandpa and my brothers would hunt for our meat. That's what we ate. We ate venison for the most part. We had milk cows, a couple milk cows, so we made all our own cheeses and our milk, obviously, our cream. We had beehives for honey, and we tapped all the maple trees on the property for sap. So while my classmates often came to school with their Little Debbie snacks, I came with carrots from the root cellar. So no one wanted to trade with me at lunch, you know. But despite all of this, I never felt the stress of poverty in my childhood. I never felt that. I was profoundly loved, and the whole 40 acres was my playground. It was magical to me. We had out back, we had a pond where we did a lot of fishing and swimming in the summer and ice skating in the winter. I spent hours crawling around on my belly, watching the bullfrogs and the water skeeters and the water bugs. I would sit quietly in the cattails at the edge of the pond, watching the great blue herons and the muskrats and the sandhill cranes. Just a few photos back by the pond. This is my son who now fishes. We also had on the property a large wooded area, and my dad made sure we knew all the trees by name, all the plants by name, because it was important to him. He grew up with the same. He was in relationship with these trees, and it was important to him that we also be in relationship with these trees. So we would watch for the ripening of the May-apples. There was a giant basswood tree, and every year a vulture would come, a turkey vulture, and lay her eggs in there and drag carcasses for her babies to eat when they were hatched. And my dad cut trails through the woods for walking and biking. We had a creek that was lined with wild plum trees. So in the spring, we would wade in the water, and these beautiful blossoms on either side would kind of create this lovely canopy over top. And so we'd be hunting for tadpoles. When the creek swelled, we would get on a raft and ride down the raft in the creek. And then because it was a flower farm, we were surrounded by these beautiful fields of flowers, row upon row of plants and flowering shrubs. And I walked barefoot everywhere. I knew the curves of the earth. I knew where the bends and the dips were. I knew where the thistles were. I knew where the pine cones lay scattered on the ground. I knew where to avoid the chestnut hulls. I knew where the ground was sandy. I knew where it was clay. Just a few more. This is the field next to my house. I had a favorite spot up on the top of an alfalfa field, and there I would do this, what I called sky gazing. It was my quiet place when I was a kid. I would push down the alfalfa and make a little nest for myself and lay on my back. And looking back, I can realize that this was a sacred place of silence and contemplation for me long before I knew what that word contemplation meant. During the day, I would watch the clouds rolling over in the afternoon. In the summer, I often slept out there in that same spot, under the open sky, under the stars, seeking out the planets, naming the constellations. Again, my dad always wanted to make sure we understood what the constellations were, knew the stories and the tales behind the constellations. And it was out here where I first began to realize the vastness of the universe. It was here where I first began to feel how small and finite I actually am. And it's also where I began to contemplate that despite my smallness, how miraculous and amazing that I am so loved. My dad used to organize family meteor gazing parties out here. So everyone would bring their lounge chairs and we would lay them down in the field and just look up at the sky and watch the meteors fly across. In fact, I spent so much time out here when I was in first grade. We had to fill out these little things in the classroom. There was a square and we had to draw a picture and then a few lines, and it said, "When I grow up, I want to be," and I said, "a sky watcher." And my teacher said, "Oh, you want to be a meteorologist. That's what that is. You want to be a meteorologist." So I said, I didn't know there was a fancy name for this. So I said, "Yes, I want to be a meteorologist." And she helped me write it down. And then I went home and I showed my parents and they said, "Really? You want to predict the weather? You know, that doesn't seem like something you would want to do." And then I went back to my teacher and I said, "Yeah, no, I don't want to be a meteorologist. I literally just want to lay on my back and watch the sky. That's what I want to do." So my relationship with the back 40, as I came to call it, was personal. It was intimate. This was a significant aspect of home for me, the actual land. But despite finding my home on the back 40, despite feeling content and at peace in my small world, that glimpse and recognition of my smallness that I had come to understand up on that hill also grew in me this deep curiosity for what else was out there. I knew this was a wide world. There were people who spoke different languages, people who believed differently than me, people who saw the world through very different lenses, and I was curious. So I just began to wonder, if I'm so small, what else is out there? Eventually, I went to Calvin College, studied political science. Then I moved to Washington, D.C., worked on Capitol Hill, and I began traveling a lot of solo road trips around the country, solo trips around the world. My parents were terrified. This was before cell phones. And the more I saw of the world, the more that hunger in me grew to travel more, to see more, to learn more. I just realized the wideness and the expansion of learning was beyond anything. Eventually, my experience on Capitol Hill compelled me to go to seminary. So I went to seminary. I met my husband. We began church planting after seminary. We were in the Christian Reformed Church at the time. We had 4 children. And then I wrote this book because as my views were expanding, my theology was shifting, my political views were changing, and that's the story in this book. Well, through all those years, while the ground of home, the 40 acres, always remained my friend, always remained a safe space, always felt like home, the community of home began to feel less and less like home. It became harder to come here, and I would find myself, every time I was back for a visit, making myself very small to fit in. So when this book came out, where it starts is our family has just been living in Washington, D.C. We were starting a church there. And we'd been away from home, from here, for over a decade. We were ministering and living in some of the harder areas of Washington, D.C. at the time. And at this point, my theology had expanded, my politics has shifted, and we left D.C. for primarily 2 reasons. The first was the cost of living was impossible. We were absolutely burned out. We were both working full-time jobs and trying to start a church and trying to help our kids navigate the D.C. public school which is a very tough district to be in. And then the reason we came back to Holland was because one of our sons was struggling with severe dyslexia. And there was an amazing school, Zeeland Christian had this incredible program for kids with dyslexia. In fact, we had been told, because my son's case was so severe, that he would never read or write. And one woman told us, I will get your son reading. And she was at Zeeland Christian, so that's what brought us back here. So I'm going to read a part of this chapter, the first chapter. So in the beginning of this chapter, we've gotten in the car, we've packed up the U-Haul, we're heading over, and we're just getting across Ohio, and we're about to enter Michigan. And I've just been talking about how hard it's been to leave this community in DC that was so diverse and so bountiful and that we loved so much, and the angst I was feeling about coming home. After the long slog through Ohio, we crossed under the big blue "Welcome to Pure Michigan" sign. And I was jolted to full wakefulness by the notoriously hardscrabble Michigan highways, which tossed the van around as if we were driving down a rough gravel road. My mind began racing. What are we doing here? Will they even want us back home? All my fears and questions were met with silence as I dodged 6-inch deep potholes. We should have moved somewhere else. I wondered if this pocked war zone of a road was a warning of things to come. The kids began whooping it up in the back of the van. They were eager to live 2 flower fields and 1 alfalfa field away from Grandpa and Grandma and closer to their cousins. In DC, we lived on a busy street. Sirens screamed day and night, and shouting voices swam from the open windows across the thick, hot soup of summer night air. The ability to roam the wild country would be a welcome contrast. In the thrill of adventure, they seemed easily able to embrace what was ahead and set aside the sadness of missing their friends and neighbors. I decided to make an effort to meet them in their enthusiasm. I began the work of burying my fears, my grief, and hesitations in order to dig out the little pockets of hope that were hidden inside me. I joined them in pronouncing all the great things that were waiting for us in Michigan. Open fields, fresh air, small town, minimal traffic, great schools, a yard, a garden, Lake Michigan, Grandpa and Grandma, sublime sacred silence. Maybe this would all be okay after all. The more mile markers the minivan trundled past, the more both my hopes and fears expanded inside me, while my breath felt squeezed out of my conflicted lungs. The confused state of my insides started spinning, bordering on nausea. Would the place and people of my hometown ever allow me to really feel at home? I was no longer part of the tribe, I knew that. While my values hadn't changed, the political expression of those values had shifted. This would be enough to make for a thorny existence in a conservative community. I knew this because there was a time when I was part of the hometown crowd that demonized people who were exactly like the person I had become. Being politically liberal was a grave sin, and I was sure the wider community would tell me in a variety of ways that I was unwelcome, unwanted, and outside the grasp of God's grace. The increasing joy and excitement on 4 little faces bobbing around in my rearview mirror offset my doubts and angst. Somewhere on Interstate 96, I resolved to endure anything as long as my kids were okay. Keeping them feeling safe, loved, valued, and nurtured would be my goal. I gripped the steering wheel and found myself praying that the challenges of coming home would not shatter their sweet, enthusiastic spirits. The landscape outside the window started to become familiar, like an old acquaintance at first, then like a longtime friend, and as we were pulling into a gravel driveway, as familiar as family. We were home. The garage door was a mosaic of welcome home messages from my niece and nephews. An unexpected surprise for the kids, a wee little seed of hope pressed into the soil of my mind. We climbed out of the van and stretched the crimps out of our muscles. Squealing, the kids skipped quickly inside like little grasshoppers. The screen door creaked open and slapped shut behind me. This was the house that would be our home, the home that my grandparents built and lived in during the latter half of their lives, the home that sat at the edge of the 40-acre farm my dad grew up on, that I grew up on, and where my parents still lived. I was flooded with the warmth of nostalgia. It was unexpected. My dried-up eyes started to draw from a restocked reservoir. My memory called up the lingering scent of date-filled cookies, mothballs, Grandpa's Big Chief chewing tobacco, and Grandma's Avon skin cream. How were these scents so palpable, given that Gramps and Grams had been gone for years? Their smells must have saturated the carpet, soaked into the walls. I swear I could see Grandfather's bony frame tucked into the corner of the room, sunk in his brown recliner, a stack of books beside him on the table, checkerboard cracked at the seams and repaired with layers of brittle masking tape, lying open and ready on the leather footstool. He looks up and called out to me, "Christy Ray, I've been waiting for you. Let's go. The board is ready." I could hear him as he always was. I could hear his voice coming from his corner of the room, through his nearly toothless grin. Wet tobacco wads set on the coaster on the table beside him. I squeezed my eyes against the tears trying to escape, aching to turn back the years to simpler times when the world seemed a small and straightforward place, to sit at his feet and wait for him to slide the first worn wooden checker across the board. Home. Everything looked the same. Dark sienna living room carpet with smudges of rust color worked in. Dark walnut cabinets with brass handles straight out of the 1970s, lining both sides of the tiny galley kitchen. I moved down the hall and peeked into the small bathroom. Mustard yellow tub, gold yellow floor tiles, just as it had always been. One bedroom with lime green shag carpet that was all the rage in 1978, and a second bedroom with a more updated cream-colored Berber carpet. The kids scrambled downstairs to run around the wide open unfinished basement. Winston shouted from the bottom of the stairs, "Hey, we can ride our scooters and rollerblades down here." I smiled at the thought and moved through the kitchen and out the back door. Stopping just beyond the edge of the yard, I kicked my shoes off, stepped into the field and sunk my cramped, caged feet into the warm, just-turned soil of the back 40. Robins and blue jays were chattering wildly in the black walnut trees. Song sparrows fluttered at the bird feeder. I gazed across the field where acres of gladiolas were cracking through the soil, and my eyes lifted to the woods beyond. As I inhaled slowly and deeply, the sun-warmed soil wrapped itself around my feet, and the breeze threw open its arms as if to say, "Welcome home." I let myself fall fully into this unconditional embrace. The earth knew me. A voice from somewhere whispered to my heart that this patch of earth would love me, accept me, and understand me just exactly as I was in all my circumstances, regardless of how I fared in the world. Fresh air moved over the alfalfa field, carrying a hint of the neighbor's milk cows with it before flowing easily and fully through my lungs. My clenched muscles relaxed and eased. All my twisted, anxious nerves unfurled. This was the ground that had birthed me, nurtured me, and held me all those years. I knew for certain this ground would hold me still. As I was easing myself into place, a small cloud of dust rose in the distance. I squinted as Mom and Dad emerged, rumbling across the field on the gator towards us. The kids ran from the house, squealing as their grandma and grandpa approached the yard. A smother of lanky little arms and legs wrapped around my parents like kite string knotted around a willow branch, and they were buried in affection. As that tight knot of love began to dissipate, Mom and Dad looked beyond my children to me, their open arms ready to embrace. I made my way across the yard and fell into them. I was home. Thomas Wolfe famously said, "You can never go home again." And I disagree. When we came back, I felt very much as if I and my family was a square peg in a pegboard of round holes. And I did feel that in order to fit in order to have a place, people would try to hammer us in, and we would have to shave off all those edges of who we were. That we would have to shave off all the things we'd learned out there, the expansiveness we'd come to appreciate and embrace and love. But you cannot unsee the things you've seen. You cannot unhear the stories you have heard. You cannot. And so we ended up saying, you know what? There's no round hole for us. There's no place we can fit in. So we are going to have to cut a hole for ourselves. And that's what we did. Because we can't feel at home if we can't be who we truly are and be accepted in a place. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone. But I have felt the most at home in those spaces where doesn't matter the views people have, doesn't matter their politics, doesn't matter their faith traditions. What matters is that we are loved and respected, and that we love and respect each other in these spaces. And so, so I would love to hear from you and chat with you. I mean, what is home to you? What do you think of when you think of home? How do we know when we're home? Can you ever go home again after you've been away and you've changed? I will say that we have felt at home in every place we've lived. We've truly felt at home. But coming back here was the hardest to feel at home, coming back to this place. And I think it's an important question to wrestle with, even as church communities. This is one of the fastest growing areas in the state. There are always different people moving in. How can we help them feel at home? So just any thoughts or any questions you have for me, would love to hear them.
Let me say first that we are live streaming and it's recording, so be aware of that. And to use the hospitality, I'm Larry Schuyler, and I invite you to say your name as well as you share your news. And I think it was Barry, or no, Milt.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you for your talk, Christy.
Thanks, Milt.
Oh, Milt Newsma, sorry. We were listening to Ann Curzan on Michigan Radio, or Michigan Public, they call it now. That's what they say. And this morning she was talking about the meaning of the word resonate. And I have to say your talk resonates with me because my experience is very similar to yours. My dad was a pastor. He served Fourth Reformed Church here in the 60s, and it was in the 60s. I went to high school and Hope College. Couldn't wait to get out of town. It was too Dutch, too conservative, too stifling. Church 4 times every Sunday.
Ooh,
Morning
I thought
worship.
2 was bad.
Sunday school, Christian Endeavor, evening service, not to mention catechism and midweek service. I mean, I just had it up to I'd like to say I had the Holy Ghost up to my gills, but that doesn't sound very good. I couldn't wait to get out of town. Went to Detroit for fresh air, if you can believe it. That's where I met my wife, Marilee, and we lived all over the place. New Jersey, Chicago, Detroit, and we moved back here to retire, basically. And I have to say I couldn't be happier. Now, whether I changed or whether the town changed, I'm not sure. It might be a little of both.
I think so.
How is it with your experience? Was it you that changed or the town that changed, or both?
Well, I think both have changed. Hopefully both have changed for the better. I hope I have. Yeah, so what I often say is, I, in this place, was handed a bunch of values, right? The importance of telling the truth, the importance of kindness, the importance of welcoming the neighbor, the importance of welcoming the immigrant. And I grew up in Graafschap, CRC, where we took in Cambodian refugees. Of course, we would do that because that's an expression of our love for God. These kinds of things that I was handed, I don't believe I've let go of those things. But the expression of those values has shifted because of what I learned in other places. When we were in DC, I was working on a lot of, doing some work with former Congressman John Lewis. I knew nothing about racism growing up here, knew nothing about it. I was very sheltered. I was in the Christian schools. I was in Graafschap Christian Reformed Church. I did Calvinettes. I was surrounded by people who looked like me, who believed like me, who thought like me, and for the most part. And when I went out and began to be aware of these systemic realities, these systemic injustices, understanding the complexities around issues like hunger and poverty that I was just so naive I knew nothing about growing up here. I didn't have exposure to that kind of thing. So I took my values and I applied them to this growing understanding that I had of the world. And so coming back was so hard because people saw the expression of those values and didn't understand them, and so immediately jumped to, unkind conclusions. And so it was very, very hard for a long time for us when we first came back. And I will say, especially, I think because our kids were in the Christian school when we came back, because our son needed this program, it was extra hard for our family. In fact, when I visited here from Washington, D.C., and I went to Zeeland Christian, the school, to meet with Barb Newman was her name, this extraordinary woman who was doing incredible work with kids. I met with her, and when she said, I looked at my son's reports and said, I will teach your son to read. And everyone else had told us we can't do it. I went to my car and I sobbed for 20 minutes behind the steering wheel because, first of all, someone's going to teach my son to read. That's wonderful. But in this place, we're bringing our kids not only back to West Michigan, but to Zeeland Christian School. It's going to be, it was terrifying. It was terrifying because I knew how people like us were treated because I had once treated people like me that way. So, yeah, it was hard, but we did eventually find our way.
Dave Myers. Your talk, Christy, I'm sure for many of us evokes memories of our own life trajectories, which have diverged us from our siblings and our family members often as we've traveled different routes to different places and then gone home again. So for me, home is growing up on the sea, Puget Sound, right on the beach with family around. And we now have a home there that we go back to and share with others, especially family members. And that has involved then navigating, reconnecting with family from whom our paths and our thinking has diverged. We've, I think, navigated that successfully because we simply don't talk about the things that we differ on.
Yeah.
And we focus on the things we love together and our love for one another. And it's worked out in a very healthy way. But it has to be sort of by mutual consent that we kind of steer clear of certain topics and enjoy everything else together.
Yeah.
How have you navigated that with your family and your relationships? Have you re-engaged? You want to speak about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a really great question. When we first came back, so when I talk about cutting out a square peg hole for ourselves, that we could say, this is who we are. We can't apologize for who we are. This is who we are. Because when we first moved back, Dave, it was like, okay, we have to make ourselves small. We cannot talk. We can't share our views. We just let everyone around us talk, but we can't say anything. And we did that for a while, and it was suffocating. And then we realized we're not home with these people. If they can all share their views, and we have to stay silent and quiet. So we started opening up in other ways publicly, but not directly to the family. So they became aware of our views, and the responses have been quite different. So my parents' curiosity, well, let's talk about that. You know, so in my whole family, we've had great conversations about our differences, and my parents were very conservative. They weren't Trump conservatives, so we also had, you know, we were able to navigate that really well. Now, my husband's side of the family, it was a no talking politics at all. We were very different from them, but then when my husband ran for Congress in 2020, then it became very public, and so we no longer, there's no contact with his family. We are not part of that family anymore. So that,
I'm just guessing that must hurt.
it hurts, yes, it hurts. It hurts a lot. We, I think, you know, through lots of counseling and all of that, we've managed to get through that, not with the family, but, you know, my husband would say, he says he feels very settled about it. He doesn't feel like it was his family in the end. It didn't have a family. There wasn't that love. There wasn't, you know, everything was very conditional, and very harsh and very cruel. And so, you know, we feel our church family truly feels like real family. Our close friends feels like real family. But yeah, that's a relationship that at this point seems beyond repair. And we had to protect our kids from some of the things they were saying too. So. Any other thoughts or questions?
yeah,
or things that have bubbled up?
I'll make a thought.
Who are you?
Oh. I'm Larry Schuyler. So I was a pastor at Central Park Church, probably as you were growing up. So I was in your neighborhood. And we came in the early 80s. One of the things that impressed me about Holland was that it did make room for folks like you and perhaps like me. People who had grown up, gone away somewhere, and then decided to come back. And they found the adequate jobs that they needed, the place. And I was always impressed of how Holland made room, in some respects, for its own. That was an interesting thing. And the second thing, which is right along with that, is that as I arrived, had a pastor who was here, and I had known him from earlier years as I was growing up, and he said, I want you to know what's going to happen. You're going to get invited to people's house for dinner or whatever. You'll get invited once. After that, then their family is there. And you got to find some other way in which to have relationships. And that was true as well.
Yeah.
Of about what this community is like and what it means to be home.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I want to just ask you is that as I was knowing your neighbors, basically, as a pastor, they were talking about as they grew flowers, they'd have flower carts. And they would peddle them up in Macatawa Hills in particular, and down even to the city market. Was that experience of your grandparents?
Nope. So when I was in 5th grade, my dad started the flower business. So he had been a history teacher prior. And when I was in 5th grade, he started the flower business, and my grandpa and I would sell at the Holland Farmers Market before the lovely market, back on just the black top, you know, back in the parking lot. But yeah, so we started, that was, I can't do the math, it was a long time ago, 40 years ago or so.
I'm Taylor Holbrook. This is very poignant for me because last week I was in my home in New York. I was at Marble Collegiate Church with Justin Myers and the delegation from Oman there. And my sisters are moving back from Hong Kong to Boston, and my other sister's moving from Brooklyn to Manhattan. All at the same time, we're all lost our homes and are moving. And I wonder, because the comment that comes to me is, how can you go to West Michigan? You know, like leaving New York, leaving all of that. And the comments must have come to you as well.
Yeah.
Like, why would you go back there? I have my answers. I'm interested in how that was received, but I'm dealing with kind of that expectation from the outside. Like, can anything good come from Holland, Michigan? And it was interesting because I just walked from Pillar, where my daughter-in-law is working, to here in the snow, and I thought, this is miserable. But then something in me shifted, and I said, this is joyful. I love this weather. It feels real to me. And for me, that was a secret of coming. This has never been my home. It's my wife's home. But it was a secret of coming here saying, I love this.
Yeah.
And just embracing it in that walk from Pillar to Hope became a metaphor for me of embracing a move from the East Coast to the Midwest.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I feel the same way, first of all, about the seasons. I actually love the seasons, and winter has been one of my favorites. And it precedes spring, which, you know, it's all of it is, each season gives you this anticipation for the next one, which I love. But yeah, we were asked a lot, like, why would you come back to West Michigan? But I will say that with all the hardships of coming back, there is something so precious about this place. The people here, there is a kindness. It's amazing to walk into a coffee shop and people stop by your table because they know your name. We didn't have that, you know, in many of the other places we lived. There is a kindness, I think, about people here that we haven't experienced in other places. Now, there's also that West Michigan nice, which, you know, has a shadow side, I think. But yeah, there was a lot of beauty to be rediscovered about this place. And just a little slower life was really nice compared to the other places we were.
Christy Wilkins, you talk about maintaining your square-edgedness as opposed to being shoved into a round hole. Have you become more practiced at that? Is that wearisome from time to time, or have you found a grid with a number of other people in square whose squareness is apparent?
Yeah, so here's another thing that I learned coming back is if you say it out loud and you think you're alone, you will discover that you are not alone. And also that gives other people permission to cut the square edges out of their holes. So when we first came back, Brian and I were so burned out on formal ministry, we were done. We said, we are not doing that again. We were so tired from our Washington, D.C. experience. It was just around the clock, never a single day off. And we both had jobs from D.C. we were able to do from a distance. And then people started coming. As we cut that square hole, people started coming to us and saying, can you guys start a church, you know, where people like us can, with these square people, you know, can have a place. And we said, no, you know, we said, we're not doing that. More and more people began coming. And then we finally said, we'll do a backyard Bible study, but this is not a church. So we did a backyard Bible study. And that started growing, and then we have a very small house. And so we moved it to someone else's house. And then it started growing, and then someone said, hey, there's this really great song that goes with what we're talking about. Can I bring my guitar? Can we do a song? And we said, okay, but let's be clear, this is not a church. We are not doing church. So we were doing this Bible study, and then we started incorporating songs. And then we had someone came and said, hey, this liturgy I came across this week, it's so good. Can we just do this? If I print it off for everyone? And we said, okay, but can we just reiterate, this is not church. This is not a church. And so, we were studying the Bible together. We were singing songs. We were doing liturgies. And we had very interesting, there were Hope College professors coming. There were Calvin Seminary professors coming. People who said, look, I just need a space where I can be honest, where I can wrestle in the open with the things I struggle with about the biblical text. And we said, we're not here to give answers. We're here, this is a conversation. We're learning together. We're growing together. And so it became a very interesting space. And then finally, my husband said, I think I'm feeling that call back to ministry, because we were, by this time, a large group. And so we went back to it. And then our first service ended up being after the 2016 election. And people came stumbling in the door because they said, we can't be in our church this morning because people will be celebrating. And that's kind of how our church got started. And our first service was a service of lament. But speaking out loud began to kind of draw other people who weren't sure what they believed, or they felt they didn't belong in one way or another, and they wanted to be part of this community that was having a conversation. And so that's how we got started.
So an observation and a question.
Yeah.
We've been talking about leaving home and coming back home. We welcome Taylor Holbrook home, by the way. It's great to have you here. There's another subset of people who stay home but see home change over time. So I'm sitting in back of beloved Lois Boersma, who will turn 104 years old this summer,
Oh, wow.
and who has, I'm sure, many stories she could tell us about how she has been here, but what is home as she's experienced that has maybe evolved in very significant ways over time. That is just my observation.
Yeah.
And maybe Lois will have a story to tell us.
Yeah.
But my question is for Steve. You've also written about home and going home. Tell us a little bit about what drew you into your work and what you. I know it's Christy's day.
No,
but
I'd
say
love
something.
to hear from Steve.
Yeah, I have a book called Beyond Homelessness, and I co-authored it with my friend Brian Walsh, who Institute for Christian Studies days, and I was a graduate student in Toronto, Ontario. But my experience grew out of writing that book, of working at a homeless shelter in Pasadena, California, when my wife and I were both students at Fuller Theological Seminary. You want to find people from all over the world who are homeless, go to Southern California. Especially Californians who are, from other parts where the climate isn't quite so nice, and year-round they can survive, if not flourish, in a place like Pasadena. So I just started volunteering at a local homeless shelter, and then ended up basically running it for my internship senior year at Fuller Seminary. And that experience stayed with me. We moved to Chicago after that. I did my PhD at the University of Chicago and got involved there with, again, work with homeless folks. So then discovered that I was writing an essay for a journal, and my friend Brian was writing almost exactly the same essay. We didn't know about it.
Wow.
So he said, we need to collaborate on this, and that became the book Beyond Homelessness, Christian Faith in a Place of Displacement. And we talk about street people homelessness. We also talk about ecological homelessness, which has only increased since that book came out, the sense of not feeling at home on our home planet. And we talk about this curious thing called postmodern homelessness, an experience we had, both of us, of people who lived in mansions and still felt homeless. They had, all the money, all the things that were supposed to make for the good life, and still used the language of homelessness to describe their life. So that's the second to last chapter of the book, is discussion of what some have called postmodern homelessness, and what what resources we Christians have and ought to be using to help people who feel that way. So,
That's powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
you're welcome.
Christy, I'm Terry DeYoung. Thank you very much for your book. It was delightful reading it. I grew up in Illinois, about 50 miles south of Chicago. My dad also was a farmer. He, however, rented property, and sometimes we did not live in the ground that he was farming. And my experience of growing up on the land, being the son of a farmer, was almost opposite of yours, because I never, ever heard my dad talk about the kinds of things that you write about, and feeling at home and in a relationship with the trees and the ground and the sky and all of those things. And I don't know how much of that had to do with his simply using property to grow crops or raise livestock, as opposed to actually being, in a sense, married to the ground that he was on. But I wanted to ask you, in reading your book, about the writing and editing, what you chose to describe, what you got specific about, and what you kept more general. My impression is you really are quite vulnerable in the book, open, personal in respects. But when I finished, I was thinking, darn, I wanted to hear more of the nitty-gritty about the campaign that Brian was
Yeah.
involved in and who said what.
Yeah.
And what was it about Grafskip CRC that, you were deathly afraid to return to? I commend you for not naming names, in a sense, but I really wanted to know the names. I wanted to know the nitty-gritty, the dirt.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, Jim Dumaroff, a person who's familiar to folks here at Hope Church, about his assistance in helping you decide what to name,
Yeah.
what to share, and what not to share.
Yeah.
And I know the book could have been many hundreds more pages if you'd chosen to get really, really personal and share lots and lots of details. But what was that process like? And then how did that influence or affect your relationships with people you know who read your book now and say, oh, or, oh.
Yeah, so I did actually leave a lot out. And initially, there were many more chapters in this book. And some of the stuff I cut out because it was about my children. And I just thought I needed to write that for myself. They endured some really awful things. And they're going to be working through it probably for the rest of their life, some of what they went through during that campaign. And I just felt, this is not my story to tell. And they're still on a healing journey. And some of them want nothing to do with faith because of what they experienced at the hands of Christian school kids. And so it's not my story to tell is where I landed with that. And then there was a lot more I could have talked about with Brian's campaign. I didn't want to focus the book on that for whatever reason. Again, I had written a couple more chapters just on that, but as I read it, I just felt like, I don't know, it felt like it was dragging something down that I didn't want to drag down. And so Jim Dumaroff helped me as well with some of stories from my childhood that were pretty ugly, and in part because my dad dies midway through the book. As I'm writing the book, he dies, and it was a horrible, unexpected death. And many of the people who I had experienced some hard things as a child at their hands, after my dad died, we were now sort of reconciling. And so I thought, I'm not going to bring those stories up now because I'm now developing this healed and beautiful relationship with those people. So there was things like that I thought, you know what? Who is going to benefit from this? What is the benefit? I had to always ask myself, what is the benefit of including this or not including this? And so, there was a lot that got cut out, but particularly around my kids. And the publisher wanted me to keep some of that juicy stuff in there because they're like, this is going to sell, books. Like, this will be great. People want to hear this stuff. And I was like, I can't put that in there. It's for me. That's not for them. So. Other thoughts, questions?
What do you hope people will take away from the book? What will they gain from reading it?
That's a great question. The chapters in the book, initially when I wrote it, it was going to be a collection of essays. And each chapter sort of had its own takeaways. And then when my publisher said, no one reads essays, so you have to make it more of a narrative, so I had to go back and connect the chapters more. It's a great question because I've heard so many different things from so many different people. I think the biggest thing that I've heard from people is this appreciation for the natural world, for what it can teach us about how we should behave in the world. And one of the distinctions I talk about in the book is this distinction between the earth and the world. So the earth being the natural planet, and the things that are naturally here, and the world being what we've made of it. And the earth is teaching us an awfully lot about balance and community, but we're so busy, we don't pay attention, we're not in relationship with it, so we don't listen to it. It's easier to exploit things we're not in relationship with, people and the planet. And so I hope that people will slow down a little maybe, notice what's around them, see what we can learn, be inspired by the earth for how we live in the world, be restored by the earth so that we can work in the world. That's one of the biggest takeaways people have shared with me.
Preach it, sister.
Yeah.
For the record, Marilee and I worked on Brian's campaign in 2020. One
Thank
thing
you.
I worry about is how good people like Brian may have second thoughts about running for public office because of all the crap you have to deal with.
Yeah.
That said, have you considered running again this year? I mean, his chances, I think, would be better in the midterm this year than they were in 2020 running against my fellow Frisian, Bill Huizinga.
Yeah.
Have you given it any thought, or has Brian given it any
as
thought?
long as we have kids at home, it is not a thought for us at all after the last time. We have a daughter who is a junior in high school, but yeah, Brian and I have both been asked by different campaigns and by the party to consider different offices, but at this point, it's not even a thought on our mind. Yeah, we feel like, we have this thing going with our church, and we're really creating community, we're creating activists. All of this feels really important, and like, this is where we need to be right now. So, yeah.
Yep. Larry told Brian at the Ash Wednesday dinner that I still have his sign downstairs in the basement. He said we could probably get rid of that now. Yeah, I still have it. Thank you, Christy,
Yeah,
very much.
you.
Yep, for helping us get started thinking about home. Thank you. Yep, I can say, last summer, my sister-in-law told me, your mom's yard looks pretty bad. We lived in the first house outside the Kalamazoo city limits, and on a 1-acre plot. This was like a 100-year-old farmhouse originally. And so we drove by, and it was pretty overgrown. the lilacs that my mom always cared for, and the cherry tree that I climbed with my books to read, and the forsythia bushes that I always had to stand in front of for my school picture every year. There's always the forsythia. It was a mess. My mom cared for that yard so tenderly year after year. So I went to the Kalamazoo Township office because this property had now been foreclosed on, and I knew that. And the house and my dad's business, everything had been torn down. It's all gone. Just an overgrown mess. And I said, well, don't you ever take care of the property that you own? I said, you now own this property. Don't you take care of it? Well, we have a contract with people. They mow the lawn. I said, no, they're not mowing the lawn. I said, the lawn hasn't been mowed this entire summer. I said, what are you doing as caretakers? Well, we'll look into that. The next week, the lawn was mowed. And they told me, now, they knew I didn't live in Kalamazoo. I said, well, I have family here. And they said, well, if your family ever calls you again to let you know that it's overgrown, let us know. So, yeah, so somehow home, yep, I don't live there anymore, but the memories, and it was like, let's take care of this property. So I'm still that connection, to home. It's still there. So thank you for helping us think about home and, starting off this season of Lent. Speaking of which, you can read more about on page 13 in the worship bulletin. I'm not sure what happened there. It says March 1 and then March 22. We do meet on the 8th and the 15th. You can see all of those listings in the Salt and Light publication. Next week, Terry, along with a couple representatives from Dwelling Place, are going to help us focus on what is affordable housing. How do we help people afford a home? What does that mean? And what is affordable housing? So next week, that will be our focus as we think about home. Now, many of you know that those tables back there mean that it's Pizza Sunday. So you know the routine. We need 3 rows with 5 tables in each row and 8 chairs around each table. So if you can help us flip this room right now, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.